Sometimes the world decides your story is over, but love has the power to write new chapters. Even when buried by cruelty, the human spirit can rise again, stronger and more beautiful than before. The Colorado dust settled like ash over the makeshift grave as James Clark wiped his calloused hands on his worn leather chaps. October 1884 had brought an early chill to the high plains near Red Rock, and the amber light of dusk cast long shadows across the desolate landscape. His brother Seth stood beside him, both men breathing heavily from their grim work. "It is done," James muttered, his voice carrying neither remorse nor satisfaction. The woman he had married through correspondence lay 6 feet beneath the rocky soil, buried alive for crimes that existed only in his twisted mind. Viola Clark had arrived from Boston 3 years prior, answering his advertisement for a mail-order bride with hope in her heart and dreams of a new life in the West. Those dreams had withered like prairie grass in drought. James had expected a subservient wife who would bear him sons and ask no questions. Instead, he found an educated woman who challenged his harsh treatment and refused to cower when his temper flared. Her inability to conceive children became his excuse, but her defiance sealed her fate. "Should have done this sooner," Seth spat, adjusting his black hat against the rising wind. Woman was nothing but trouble from the day she stepped off that stagecoach. The brothers mounted their horses and rode away, leaving behind what they believed was their final problem. But the prairie held secrets, and sometimes those secrets refused to stay buried. 3 miles away, Nathaniel Cross guided his aging horse through a familiar path between the scattered rocks and stubborn sagebrush. The widower had spent the last hour checking on his small herd of cattle, a daily routine that kept him busy and his mind occupied since losing his wife Margaret 3 years ago. His 10-year-old daughter Rose waited at home, probably wondering why he took so long on his evening rounds. As his horse picked its way carefully through the uneven terrain, Nathaniel heard something that made his blood run cold. A muffled sound, barely audible above the whistling wind, reached his ears. It sounded almost like crying. Human crying, coming from beneath the ground. He dismounted quickly, his weathered boots hitting the hard earth with determination. Following the sound, he discovered freshly turned soil and a crude wooden cross bearing no name. The crying grew stronger as he pressed his ear to the ground, and without hesitation, he began digging with his bare hands. Time became meaningless as dirt flew around him. His fingernails broke and bled, but he continued clawing at the earth like a man possessed. Finally, his hands struck wood, and the crying became desperate gasping. Working frantically, he pried open the rough pine boards to reveal a woman, barely conscious but miraculously alive. Nathaniel pulled Viola from her premature tomb, cradling her trembling form as she struggled to breathe the sweet evening air. The Cross Ranch house stood modest but sturdy against the vast Colorado landscape, its weathered wooden walls bearing witness to countless prairie storms. Nathaniel carried the barely conscious woman through the front door, her torn calico dress clinging to her frail frame. The kerosene lamp cast dancing shadows across the simple furniture as he gently placed her on the worn leather settee near the stone fireplace. "Papa, who is she?" Rose Cross peered around the corner, her blue eyes wide with curiosity and concern. The 10-year-old girl wore a simple brown dress and cotton apron, her blonde hair braided neatly down her back in the fashion her late mother had taught her. Nathaniel knelt beside the settee, checking the woman's pulse with hands that had delivered calves and mended broken fence posts but had never felt so uncertain. "I do not know yet, little dove, but she was buried alive, and by the grace of God, we found her in time." Rose gasped, covering her mouth with small hands. "Someone tried to kill her?" "It appears so," Nathaniel replied grimly, fetching a basin of water and clean cloth from the kitchen. The woman's face was streaked with dirt and tears, her lips cracked from dehydration. Dark bruises marked her wrists where rope had bound them, and her fingernails were broken from clawing at the coffin lid. As he gently cleaned the soil from her face, the woman stirred, her green eyes fluttering open with terror. She tried to sit up quickly, panic seizing her as she struggled to remember where she was. "Easy now," Nathaniel spoke in the same calm voice he used with frightened animals. "You are safe. My name is Nathaniel Cross, and this is my daughter Rose. You were in our home." The woman's breathing gradually slowed as she took in her surroundings. The humble ranch house felt like a palace compared to the suffocating darkness of her grave. A fire crackled warmly in the hearth, and the smell of coffee and bacon lingered in the air from their evening meal. I am Viola, she whispered, her voice hoarse from screaming. Viola Clark. The name felt strange on her lips now, tainted by the man who had tried to murder her. Rose stepped closer, her young face filled with compassion beyond her years. Are you hurt badly, Miss Viola? Papa is good at fixing things that are broken. Despite everything she had endured, Viola felt a small smile touch her lips at the child's innocent kindness. I believe I will heal, sweet girl. Thank you. Nathaniel stood, his tall frame casting a protective shadow over both females. Miss Clark, I do not know what brought you to that grave, but you are welcome to stay here until you recover your strength. The spare room has a good bed and warm blankets. Viola, his eyes filled with tears of gratitude. In this harsh land where survival often trumped compassion, she had found sanctuary with strangers who asked nothing in return. December snow blanketed the Colorado plains like a pristine shroud, transforming the harsh landscape into something almost beautiful. Inside the Cross Ranch house, the warmth of human companionship proved more healing than any medicine. Viola had spent 2 months recovering not just from her physical ordeal, but from the deeper wounds that marriage to James Clark had carved into her soul. The spare bedroom had become her sanctuary, filled with books that Nathaniel had inherited from his late wife Margaret. Viola discovered volumes of Shakespeare, medical texts, and botanical guides that spoke to her educated mind. She had graduated from a ladies' academy in Boston, where her father had been a respected physician before consumption claimed his life. Miss Viola, will you teach me to read the big words? Rose asked one snowy morning, settling beside her on the wooden chair near the frosted window. The child had become her constant companion, hungry for the attention and guidance that only a mother could provide. Of course, dear heart, Viola smiled, opening a primer to a page about wildflower identification. Your mother was wise to teach you the fundamentals. We shall build upon that foundation. As the weeks passed, Viola proved invaluable to the small household. She possessed knowledge of herbal remedies that her father had taught her, skills that proved precious in a land where the nearest doctor lived 2 days, right away. When Nathaniel injured his hand mending a broken gate, she cleaned and dressed the wound with practiced competence. Where did you learn such things? He asked, watching her work with gentle efficiency. My father believed that knowledge was the greatest inheritance he could leave me, she replied, wrapping his hand with clean linen. He said a woman should be prepared to face the world with more than just beauty and compliance. Nathaniel found himself drawn to this remarkable woman who had literally risen from the grave. Unlike the simple frontier wives he knew, Viola could discuss literature, politics, and medicine with equal intelligence. Yet she never made him feel inadequate for his practical education earned through hard work and experience. Evenings became precious time when the three of them gathered around the fireplace. Viola would read aloud from adventure novels while Rose mended clothes and Nathaniel carved wooden toys for his daughter. These moments felt like what family should be, not the harsh arrangement he had witnessed in his own childhood, but a partnership built on mutual respect and growing affection. Papa, Rose whispered one night after Viola had retired to her room. Do you think Miss Viola might want to be my new mama? I have been praying for God to send me one. Nathaniel felt his heart constrict with unexpected emotion. What makes you think that, little dove? She looks at us the way Mama used to, Rose said with the simple wisdom of childhood. Like we are her whole world. Outside, the winter wind howled across the plains, but inside the Cross Ranch house, 3 hearts were slowly learning to beat as one. Spring arrived early in Red Rock, bringing with it unwanted visitors and dangerous secrets. Reverend Elijah Palmer had been hearing whispers about the mysterious woman living at the Cross Ranch since February. The thin, sharp-featured preacher made it his business to know everyone in his congregation, and Viola Clark remained an enigma that troubled his suspicious mind. Brother Cross, Palmer said, adjusting his black coat as he stood on the ranch house porch, the good people of Red Rock are concerned about this woman who has taken residence under your roof. Where did she come from? What are her intentions? Nathaniel stepped outside, closing the door firmly behind him to protect Viola and Rose from the preacher, his prying questions. Miss Clark is a guest in my home, Reverend. She needed shelter, and Christian Charity demanded I provide it. Christian Charity? Yes, Palmer nodded, his pale eyes narrowing. But charity has its limits. People are talking. Nathaniel. They say she appeared from nowhere, like a spirit from the grave. Before Nathaniel could respond, The thundering of horses announced new arrivals. James Clark rode into the yard with his brother Seth and two other rough-looking men, their faces grim with purpose. James dismounted, his weathered face scanning the ranch house with predatory intensity. "Afternoon, Nathaniel," James said, tipping his hat with false politeness. "I am looking for my wife, Viola Clark. She disappeared from our homestead months ago, and I have reason to believe she might have sought shelter hereabouts." The blood in Nathaniel's veins turned to ice. He had suspected that Viola's burial was no accident, but to face her would be murder or required every ounce of his self-control. "Your wife, you say?" "Indeed. Poor woman took ill in the head, started making wild accusations about me and my brother. Ran off in the middle of the night during a snowstorm. We have been searching everywhere, fearing she might have frozen to death." Seth nodded gravely, playing his part in the deception. "Found her horse wandering loose near Devil's Canyon. Figured she might have fallen and hurt herself. Sought help from neighbors." Reverend Palmer's eyes widened with recognition and horror. "Gentlemen, I believe we may have found your missing wife. There is indeed a woman named Viola Clark staying at this ranch." James exchanged a quick glance with his brother, both men trying to hide their shock. They had been certain their crime was perfect, that Viola Clark lay dead and buried on their remote property. The possibility that she had survived and could expose their attempted murder sent waves of panic through both men. "Well then," James said, his hand unconsciously moving toward the pistol at his hip, "I reckon we need to have ourselves a reunion." Marshal John Stillman rode hard from the county seat when word reached him about the attempted murder in Red Rock. The grizzled lawman had seen enough frontier justice to know that truth often lay buried beneath lies and fear. When he arrived at the Cross Ranch, he found a scene that would test every ounce of his experience. Viola stood on the porch, her face pale but resolute as she faced the man who had tried to kill her. James Clark's mask of concerned husband had slipped completely when confronted with his living victim. Seth fidgeted nervously, his eyes darting between his brother and the various escape routes. "Marshal Stillman," Viola said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "These men buried me alive in October. They left me for dead in a shallow grave 3 miles west of their homestead." "That is a serious accusation, ma'am," Stillman replied, his weathered hand resting on his gun belt. "Can you prove such a claim?" Viola rolled up her sleeves, revealing the rope burns that had never fully healed. "These marks tell the story, Marshal. They bound my hands and feet, placed me in a pine coffin, and buried me like unwanted refuse." James sputtered with false indignation. "Marshal, my wife has been afflicted with madness since losing our child. She makes wild accusations against innocent men." "We never had a child," Viola replied calmly. "That is why you deem me worthless. A barren wife served no purpose in your grand plans." The marshal's keen eyes studied both parties, weighing evidence and testimony. In his pocket lay a telegram that had arrived that morning from Boston, revealing information that would change everything. Viola's uncle, a wealthy merchant, had died 6 months ago, leaving his entire estate to his only surviving relative. "Miss Clark," Stillman said carefully, "or should I say, Miss Hartwell, your uncle, this lawyer, has been searching for you. Seems you inherited a considerable sum." The revelation struck James like a physical blow. $75,000, the fortune he had dreamed of claiming by eliminating his inconvenient wife. The money that could have transformed his struggling homestead into a cattle empire. Within hours, James Clark found himself in shackles, charged with attempted murder. But the arrest divided Red Rock like a knife through fresh bread. Some townspeople viewed Viola with suspicion and fear, whispering that she had returned from the dead with unnatural powers. Others saw her as a victim of masculine cruelty who deserved justice and compassion. Old Martha Henley crossed herself whenever Viola passed. "Ain't de natural, a woman rising from the grave. Mark my words, she brings dark spirits with her." But Dr. Samuel Morrison, the town's elderly physician, examined Viola's injuries and declared publicly that her survival was miraculous but entirely human. "This woman bears the physical evidence of terrible abuse. Any talk of supernatural nonsense is shameful ignorance." The community fractured along lines of education, superstition, and personal prejudice, setting the stage for greater conflicts to come. The night came moonless and cold, perfect for the dark work that Barton Hayes had planned. The general store owner had convinced 5 other men that Red Rock needed cleansing from the unnatural evil that had taken residence at the Cross Ranch. Rufus Grant, the blacksmith, carried a coiled rope while Mayor Thompson held a flickering lantern that cast dancing shadows across their grim faces. "We do got this work tonight," Hayes whispered as they approached the ranch house. That woman defied death itself. Such things bring curses upon righteous communities. Inside the house, Nathaniel sensed danger long before the first footstep creaked on his porch. Years of frontier living had sharpened his instincts to razor precision. He gently shook Viola awake, pressing a finger to his lips for silence. "Take Rose to the root cellar," he whispered urgently. "Stay there until I come for you." Viola gathered the sleeping child in her arms, her heart pounding with familiar terror. The nightmare of helplessness threatened to overwhelm her, but Rose's warm weight against her chest reminded her that she now had something worth fighting for. The confrontation erupted when Hayes kicked open the front door, his vigilantes flooding into the modest parlor with their lanterns held high. Nathaniel stood in the center of the room, his hands empty but his posture radiating dangerous calm. "Where is she, Cross?" Hayes demanded, his voice shaking with righteous fury. "Where is the witch who has bewitched your household?" "There is no witch here," Nathaniel replied steadily. "Only a woman who survived attempted murder and a man who offered her Christian shelter." Grant stepped forward with his rope, the hemp thick and well-worn from countless hangings of horses and cattle. "Step aside, Nathaniel. We have no quarrel with you. Give us the woman, and we will handle this cleanly. You will have to go through me first." The standoff stretched like a taut wire, 6 armed men facing one determined rancher. In the root cellar below, Viola held Rose tightly, whispering prayers and promises that somehow they would survive this night of hatred and fear. Above them, the battle of wills continued until dawn, with no shots fired but every principle of frontier justice hanging in the balance. The vigilantes had come expecting easy prey but found instead a man whose honor would not bend to mob rule. When the first rays of sunlight crept through the windows, both sides remained locked in their deadly dance, waiting for someone to make the first move that would determine whether justice or vengeance would claim the day. Marshal Stillman arrived with the morning light, his deputies flanking him as they surrounded the Cross Ranch house. The lawman had ridden through the night after receiving word about the vigilante gathering, his horse lathered with sweat from the urgent journey. "Hayes! Grant!" Stillman, his voice cut through the tense silence like a blade. "Drop your weapons and step away from that house. You are all under arrest for unlawful assembly and attempted assault." The vigilantes found themselves caught between Nathaniel, his unwavering resolve inside, and the marshal, his authority outside. Their righteous fury began to crumble under the weight of legal consequences and the harsh reality of dawn, his revealing light. "Marshal, we were only trying to protect our community," Hayes protested, his earlier bravado evaporating like morning mist. "That woman brings darkness to Red Rock. The only darkness I see here is grown men terrorizing a family in their own home," Stillman replied coldly. "Now disperse before I decide to make examples of you all." One by one, the vigilantes surrendered their weapons and slunk away into the brightening morning, their mission of vengeance transformed into shameful retreat. Nathaniel watched from his window as order returned to his small corner of the world. When the last horse had disappeared over the horizon, he descended into the root cellar where Viola sat with Rose pressed against her side. The child had remained remarkably brave throughout the ordeal, trusting in the adults to keep her safe. "Is it over, Papa?" Rose whispered, her blue eyes wide with lingering fear. "Yes, little dove, the danger has passed." Viola emerged from the cellar like a woman reborn, dirt streaking her calico dress but her spirit unbroken. She had faced her second brush with death and survived through the protection of a good man and the grace of divine providence. In the quiet aftermath, as Rose played outside under the warming sun, Nathaniel found himself overwhelmed by the realization of how much this woman and her safety meant to him. The attack had crystallized feelings that had been growing throughout the long winter months. "Viola," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "I cannot bear the thought of you facing such dangers alone." She turned to him, seeing something new in his weathered features. Without another word, Nathaniel dropped to one knee on the rough wooden floor, taking her dirt-stained hand in both of his. "Will you marry me? Will you let me protect you and love you for all the days of our lives?" Through tears of joy and relief, Viola whispered the word that would change everything. Yes. The small wooden church of Red Rock had never witnessed such a peculiar wedding ceremony. 4 weeks after the vigilante attack, Viola Clark prepared to become Viola Cross in the same sanctuary where Reverend Palmer had once proclaimed her soul lost to darkness. Now he stood nervously at the altar, compelled by Marshal Stillman's pointed suggestion to perform the marriage ceremony. Dr. Morrison served as witness alongside his wife Eleanor, two of the few townspeople brave enough to publicly support the union. The elderly physician had examined Viola's medical knowledge and found her more competent than many trained nurses he had encountered in larger cities. "Do you, Nathaniel Cross, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife?" Palmer asked, his voice carrying reluctant acceptance of the inevitable. "I do," Nathaniel replied firmly, his Sunday suit freshly pressed and his boots polished to mirror brightness. He looked every inch the respectable rancher, ready to protect his chosen family against all opposition. Rose stood beside them in a new blue dress that Viola had sewn during the preceding weeks, her face glowing with the joy of finally getting the mother she had prayed for so fervently. The child had helped plan every detail of the simple ceremony, from the wildflower bouquet to the vanilla cake cooling in the church kitchen. "Do you, Viola Clark, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband?" Palmer continued, perspiration beading on his narrow forehead despite the cool spring air. "I do," Viola answered, her voice clear and strong. She wore Margaret Cross's wedding dress, carefully altered to fit her slender frame. Nathaniel had offered the garment with his late wife, memory and blessing, knowing that Margaret would have approved of this union. The inheritance from her uncle had arrived by bank draft the previous week, ensuring their financial independence from community approval or disapproval. $75,000 represented more wealth than most frontier families would see in 3 lifetimes, enough to expand the ranch and educate Rose in the finest schools. As Palmer pronounced them husband and wife, a small group of supporters gathered outside the church rang the bell in celebration. Marshal Stillman fired his pistol skyward in the traditional frontier salute, while Dr. Morrison, his wife, scattered flower petals from her prize garden. "You may kiss your bride," Palmer said with visible relief that his ordeal was ending. Nathaniel lifted Viola's simple veil and pressed his lips to hers, sealing their union with gentle tenderness. Rose cheered and clapped, dancing around the new family with infectious happiness. Outside the church, some townspeople watched from a respectful distance, their earlier hostility tempered by curiosity and grudging acceptance. The woman who had supposedly returned from the dead was now respectably married to one of their most trusted neighbors. Summer arrived with gentle rains that turned the Colorado Plains emerald green, bringing with it a gradual shift in the attitudes of Red Rock's residents. The Cross family had weathered the storms of suspicion and hatred, emerging stronger and more united than ever before. Viola's first victory came when young Tommy Morrison fell from his horse and broke his arm badly. Dr. Morrison was away treating patients in the next county, leaving the boy, his frantic mother, with no medical help. Viola arrived at their homestead with her medicine bag and gentle competence, setting the bone with skill that impressed even the most skeptical neighbors. "Where did you learn such doctoring?" Mrs. Morrison asked, watching in amazement as Viola splinted the arm with professional precision. "My father believed that healing was a sacred calling," Viola replied, wrapping the splint with clean bandages. "He taught me that knowledge shared freely multiplies its value." Word of her medical skills spread throughout the community like wildfire. When Mrs. Henderson went into difficult labor with her 4th child, the midwife sent for Viola in desperation. The birth was complicated, requiring all of her anatomical knowledge and steady nerves to save both mother and baby. The grateful husband pressed a $20 gold piece into her hands, but Viola refused the payment. "Helping bring new life into this world is payment enough," she said with genuine warmth. Meanwhile, Rose blossomed under her stepmother's loving attention. The child who had once been shy and withdrawn now laughed freely and chattered constantly about her lessons. Viola had established a small school in the spare room of their expanded ranch house, teaching not only Rose but several neighboring children whose parents valued education. "Miss Viola makes learning fun," 8-year-old Sarah Jenkins told her mother after her first week of classes. "She knows stories about faraway places and shows us pictures in real books." Nathaniel watched his wife's integration into the community with pride and wonder. The woman who had once been viewed as a harbinger of darkness was slowly becoming the heart of Red Rock's social fabric. Her inheritance had allowed them to expand the ranch and hire additional workers, bringing prosperity to the entire area. Even some former opponents began to soften their stance. Barton Hayes approached Nathaniel at the general store one afternoon. his manner awkward but sincere. "Cross, I owe you and your missus an apology," he said, unable to meet Nathaniel's eyes. "Fear made me act like a fool. Your wife has proven herself a blessing to this community." The transformation was neither complete nor universal, but progress came with each act of kindness and competence that Viola demonstrated to her neighbors. October 1885 painted the Colorado landscape in shades of gold and amber, marking exactly 1 year since Viola had clawed her way out of a premature grave. She sat on the expanded porch of their ranch house, watching Rose play with a litter of barn kittens that had been born during the summer. The child's laughter carried across the yard like music, a sound that never failed to warm Viola's heart. The transformation of their lives seemed almost miraculous in retrospect. The modest ranch had grown into a prosperous operation, with a new barn, expanded corrals, and hired hands who treated Viola with genuine respect. Her medical practice had become essential to the community, earning her a reputation that stretched beyond Red Rock to neighboring settlements. Nathaniel emerged from the house carrying 2 cups of coffee, settling beside his wife on the wooden bench he had crafted during their courtship. His weathered hands showed fresh cuts from building the new schoolhouse that would serve the growing number of families attracted to their thriving community. "The circuit judge confirmed it today," he said, offering her the steaming cup. "James Clark received 20 years in the territorial prison. Seth got 10 years as an accomplice." Viola nodded quietly, feeling neither satisfaction nor revenge at the news. Justice had been served, but her focus had shifted entirely toward the future she was building with her chosen family. "Do you ever think about what your life might have been if I had not found you that night?" Nathaniel asked, his voice thoughtful. "I prefer to think about what our lives have become," Viola replied, reaching for his calloused hand. "I was buried as an unwanted burden, dismissed as defective merchandise in a transaction that never considered my worth as a human being." Rose looked up from her play, her face glowing with the innocence of childhood. "Mama Viola, will you tell me the story about the princess who came back from the deep sleep?" Viola smiled at the child's version of her resurrection tale, carefully edited to remove its darker elements. "Of course, sweet girl. But first, help me gather those kittens before they wander too far from their mother." As the 3 of them worked together in the fading light, Viola reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. She had traveled from Boston as a mail-order bride seeking a new life, only to discover that sometimes you must die to everything you were before you can be reborn into who you were meant to become. The prairie wind carried the scent of approaching winter, but inside the Cross Ranch house, warmth and love had taken permanent residence. Their story had become living proof that even when the world decides your place is in the grave, faith and love can resurrect you to a better life than you ever dared imagine.